welcome everybody. My name is Bernard Ashwan and I'm here with Valerie Stafford from Erie, and we're going to talk through their adventure as they work their way through DITA land. There was some really interesting work done along the way. This pre-recorded session is going to be available to everybody so that you can find out what was done, why it was done, but we're also going to use some of the pods in the live portion of the conference in order to record things. Do feel free to ask your questions. We'll answer them there and we'll try to summarize them at the end as well. My name is Bernard. I am the founder and president of a company called Publishing Smarter. I'm based in Algoma Mills in Ontario, Canada. If you know roughly where New York is, just go north from New York for about 10 hours and you'll get pretty much right to my place. It's a little bit of a drive, maybe 15 hours. Valerie, you're not that far away from me. You're almost due south in Erie, Pennsylvania, but do you want to do a self-introduction and then we'll move ahead from there?
Sure. So I'm Valerie Stafford, and I am the Knowledge Management Department Manager at Erie Insurance. And like Bernard said, we're not that far from him. We're located in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is in the top leftmost corner of Pennsylvania, right on Lake Erie. I've been with Erie for almost 33 years in various positions, primarily related to technical writing. And most recently, we've added knowledge management to our technical writing services that we provide. We have been developing in DITA since 2011, and my entire team enjoys working with DITA. Over the years, we started to encounter more and more issues with the various tools and processes that we use. Finally, we reached a point where we realized we need to make some changes for both our authors and our readers. So this presentation walks you through the journey that we've had through what I'm calling DITA land.
And that was kind of a fun one from my perspective as an outsider. So we're going to be going through some of the initial steps, some of the discovery that you did, the hazards that you found along the way after you got to DITA. Using the metaphor of that journey, how did you find that roadside assistance partner? And what type of work did we do together as we traveled from start to end? Where are you now? And then also to explore a little bit of what's next, because that's always an interesting one. You had this winding road and it was always this path forward, and you got to a certain point and you said, we're here. This is now the start of our DITA adventure. Do you want to give us a little breakdown on that?
Sure. So initially we authored and published using a mainframe library management system, which worked well. It was tag driven. And then at some point over the years, we converted all of our documents to a desktop word processing tool because that was the thing to do at that time. And then DITA became very popular, and we converted all of our documents to DITA using a laptop, a DITA publishing and authoring tool. And we've been using that ever since. And we felt like we reached our destination, DITA, and we were successful.
And when was this?
That was in 2011.
So here we are 10 years later, and at that point, 10 years ago, you already had DITA success, and there was everything that you needed to have, except that there were some of these hazards. What we found when we work with companies is often they achieve something, and it's a great baseline. It's that stake where you can say, this is where we are now. But over the years, and it's never through ill intent, it's not that somebody is trying to sabotage, it's that technology moves forward. There's discovery. There are workflows that change. There's additional desire to do things. So companies end up realizing that some of their tools, their environment is a little left behind and they need to start to move forward. That they've built certain things that work for them, but not for the long term. It's a solution for now. And you start to realize, I've got this Access database. I've got this Excel spreadsheet. I've got this combination of pieces that are floating around out there. And all of a sudden, the solution that looked great 10 years ago, 5 years ago, starts to change. So can you give a little bit of an idea of some of those experiences you had?
Sure. And you summarized a lot of what we experienced. So in 2012, we experienced a change in senior management. And technical writing was not considered part of the critical path. So we weren't able to get funding or any real focus on even upgrading our authoring and publishing tool. So that has never been upgraded to this day. And then in 2013, we started to encounter software and hardware issues. And we didn't encounter them all at once, but the issues just kept mounting as the time went on. Not only was our authoring and publishing tool not upgraded, but we also had to use Windows 7 and Internet Explorer to run it. And then our CMS user interface was no longer supported and scheduled for sunset. And without that, we'd be relegated to a command line user interface, which would be a major step backwards for us.
That's awesome. But think of the graphics. You'd be able to go down to like a 16-bit video card again.
Yeah, right. We also had a custom-built connector to connect our authoring tool with our CMS, and the custom-built connector was no longer supported. Erie is currently replacing our CMS, so this soon will also be unsupported. We used an outdated version of an Access database to track all of our metadata. We actually created that ourselves, the technical writing group at the time, and we have continued to use that until just very recently, and that had never been upgraded. Then our authoring software server needed to be upgraded to meet infrastructure standards. Every step of the way, it just kind of getting, we just found more and more issues, and it became more difficult to work in the environment that we were in.
I'm guessing everybody's trying to help along the way. Somebody's coming along and saying, oh, you need to connect these things together. We can build that for you. Great, here's a piece. And then somebody else comes along and says, oh, you need to publish, or you need to have a way to track which files are in what status and who's doing what. So you build and build and build, because initially, again, 10 plus years ago, the tools didn't have these features. And you end up having this bit of a Frankenstein's monster of components where everything's being brought together with the best intention, but the villagers show up with pitchforks because they don't necessarily understand how all of these pieces that are disconnected come together into something that's a really nice solution.
Yeah, that summarizes it, because we're the only ones in the company that use DITA. So there is no other DITA expertise in the company. You know, we know a lot about authoring and publishing in DITA, but we certainly don't have that technical background.
And when you mentioned DITA, there's a lot of best practice that's in there. Some companies like specialization, some don't. As you build, especially if you're creating content early, there might not be a formal reuse model. You've got a lot of different people working with the system, maybe deviation, because there's more than one way to do it. I have an engineer friend, and his line that I love is, the great thing about standards is that there's so many to choose from. So there's a lot of these different things that are in the world of DITA, and that was not necessarily implemented as well as it could be because you were still learning. So can you go through that a little, the DITA and the best practice?
Yeah, I mean, we thought we were doing things right, and I think we did for the most part at that time. But we did have some specialization. We knew that we would have the opportunity to reuse topics and content, and we did very little of that because we weren't able to really determine an easy way to identify topics that could be reused, so they weren't.
All right. Yeah, reuse candidates, always fun.
Yes.
It's like mentally, I've got all of these things that I can reuse, but shoot, now I've got to go back and continue to do my work.
Exactly. And so you recreate it, knowing you recreate it. And then you think, well, I'll go back later and look for it. And then you're on to the next project. So that doesn't happen.
And then you get that panic, right? Where somebody comes along and says, oh, could you change and update this? And you think, oh, I know I wrote something like that somewhere else. Then you try to find it and you can't.
Exactly. We've all experienced that.
Yeah.
And then
the authors, how many did you have over the last 10 years?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. So over the last, since 2011 or so, at one time we had 22 authors. And then we had others that were broadening into technical writing and that. So we have many more people than that were in our tool and authoring and DITA. So we had a lot of best practices. Everyone that we onboarded, we had a very good onboarding program designed to make sure people understood how to use the DITA tags and what our best practices were or are, and they weren't always followed, obviously. And over the course of time, it gets messier and messier. We also had some clever formatting. We've got a lot of large tables in some of our documents. And so I want to say clever or non-standard DITA formatting is not a good thing. Any tracking or reporting that I did, and I still do, is manual. And so that takes a lot of time, and it's very difficult to compare apples to apples, monthly, quarterly, yearly, when you're looking in multiple places to get your data so that you can report. And we've never had the ability to provide metrics. And if I had a dime for every time somebody asked me, well, how often is this used? I can't tell them. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I know there was the spreadsheet. We'll talk about that a little later on. There was the access database that was mentioned. There's a lot of different components that sort of come together that are here's the good and here's the weak of what we're putting together. So there was the hardware, software, the technical aspect of it. There was the implementation aspect of it. And I'm guessing it's not even necessarily left hand, right hand. It's that the entire collective brain and the nervous system are all trying to move forward, but they're working in a bit of a disjointed way. And again, not through any intent, just because there's so many things that everybody wants to contribute that you run into the challenge of how do we bring all of this back to a common starting point so that we can go in and say, that's where we were. This is where we now are. If I look at that starting point into your next phase, if we continue with this idea of a journey, you had come along, you had your get to know each other, you had your get married, have your honeymoon phase with DITA, things were good. Then along the way, you hit not the 7-year, but the 10-year itch of things are a little different. And you thought, all right, we're going to rekindle this relationship between all of the different aspects of and head out on this new aspect of a journey. So walk me through a little bit. Where were you 2018-ish, a few years ago, when you got ready to start on this next phase? And actually, just doing the math, 2018, that is almost the 7-year itch. It really is a relationship with DITA.
Yeah, so you're right. Our new journey started in 2018, and that's after we moved out of the division that didn't consider us part of the critical path and into another division where we had the support from my manager, Karen Skorupski, who's a vice president at Erie, and also the executive vice president that she reported to at the time. So fortunately, we had the support and backing that we needed to get a project in place and approved so that we could start to look at replacing our current tool set. And once we did that, we evaluated several tools and selected what we felt would be the best tool for us, which is Adobe Experience Manager. Knowing we didn't have any DITA experts in-house, it was a no-brainer to reach out to actually you, Publishing Smarter. We worked with you and your company several years back on some things, and it went very well. And of course, we know you from various conferences that we've been to and stuff. So I immediately said, we need to get Publishing Smarter engaged, and then we pursued that.
That was fun. And every time, so I've had a couple of opportunities to drive around down through to the US and through Buffalo, and then past the Erie exits. And I can actually look over and go, I know that if I exit here and I go north, I'm going to get to the offices, which is kind of fun. It's nice to see those things. So at this point, we're sort of 2018, 2019, 2020, and you're starting to get into that moment of, common hindsight and vision. And 2020 sort of gives us both of those. 2020 vision, you've got this focus of where you want to go, or 2020 vision of hindsight. You knew where you were, you knew what some of the issues had been early on. If we then look at moving from that 2018 line in the sand date-ish of there's things we need to do. Now we come along and we say, moving forward. I think one of the first things we did was, a deeper analysis of your content, trying to figure out what do you have and looking at all of the different things. That spreadsheet of yours, the files that you have, the volume of information, can you talk a little bit about, because you had a ton of stuff. It was just fragmented.
It was very fragmented. So the Access database that I mentioned was our Bible that had all of our metadata in it. And it goes back as far as there's still fields in there for 3-ring binder size and sheet lifters and sheet protectors and all those things when we were publishing in paper. Since none of us really had the skills or the time to maintain it in 2018, it was like, okay, we need to capture other information, metadata, because a lot of what's in the Access database doesn't apply anymore. And the things we really do need to be tracking, I don't have a place for them. So I created an Excel spreadsheet to house all those new fields that we needed. That was great, except for then we were still using the Access database as our Bible for some things, but then other things we were using the Excel spreadsheet for. So my team had to update things in 2 places. It certainly wasn't ideal. They don't like doing that. And then you had to look multiple places to do any kind of reporting that I was trying to do too. So yeah, that's been pretty ugly. And we are so thankful to be off the Access database. And we can't wait to get off the Excel spreadsheet so that we can do most of our managing in ADM.
The analysis was great. I mean, knowing all of this stuff existed really helped me. I started looking at some of this and I got a good feel for so many different components of your information, started to look at it. And I thought there's 2 ways that metadata is really useful. One is for the consumer of the content, for somebody to be able to go in and get targeted information that's applicable because they're looking for information on fire, or they're looking auto, or they're looking for home. But there's also the metadata and the information that's used that helps the creators of the content, the curators, your team. And that was the other thing that I thought was really nice. You actually had both types of information. You knew who your audience was. You had things configured for your writers, and it really made it a little easier because you had already done a lot of the core analysis, or you had tracked a lot of the information, to then come along and take that and say, let's build a consolidated sheet so that we can put together a system and we can design this way that we can take your legacy materials, run it through a set of workflows, and then be able to either automatically clean it up and add the things that matter, or manually go back and deal with some of the exceptions so that we could ingest content. And I know that there were a lot of different people from a lot of teams involved. Can you expand a bit on some of the design aspects that we put together, not for look and feel, but for function, so that you could get what you needed ready so that we could load it into AEM?
I can't stress enough the importance of reviewing and analyzing your files and really knowing them inside out. We identified non-standard file names and non-standard DITA formatting and customizations. And then,
I'm laughing. One of your file names, I remember there's a file called null 15.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Definitely didn't follow our standards, yes. And we've been working with Bernard to develop a new Erie branded map and bookmap templates. Very closely examined our metadata, and then we determined and configured our AEM folder structure, because we want all of our individual documents in their own folder so that it's easy to find. They're easy to find. And then we worked together on the file ingestion process to prepare our files for ingestion and develop a master spreadsheet for ingestion purposes.
I'm blown away by the amount of information that sort of came together, because I think that spreadsheet had 20,000 different topics by the end of this.
Right.
And we've figured out a way with you in order to make the content as findable as possible, not only for the readers of the content, but also for those who are going to be, as I mentioned, creating and curating. So at this point, you're at that ready to start to implement. We're training, we are loading sample files, we're starting to get to the point of ingestion of larger materials. Where's your implementation vision? What are some of the things now that you're sort of here today, literally within a week or two of when the conference is happening, we're starting to go live.
Right. So just today, we reviewed our metadata tabs. I worked with Nathan. We reviewed the metadata tabs that he's creating. They're looking great. The ingestion spreadsheet is ready. So once he has the metadata ingestion or schema tabs set up, then he'll be able to use that spreadsheet to test the implementation into our non-prod environment. And in preparing for that, I also did a lot of manual cleanup on things that weren't standard so that they will not have an issue going into AEM. But I had to keep track of what I did because those things are probably not going to work for us after we're in AEM. So I need to go back and make the proper adjustments after the ingestion so that the authors don't have issues when they get assigned an update. I want them to be able to just do the update and not have to figure out what the problem is before they can do the update.
And I remember looking at workflow. One of the things we looked at is what's your review? Because it's not just create the content, send it to a subject matter expert, get a little bit of feedback, and then send it out the door. You have some interesting workflow challenges that are coming along as well, because you have, hey, fellow authors of content, do a review. Hey, subject matter experts, do a review. Hey, internal resources, do a review. I'm always interested to see during the discovery phase, what do we have that comes up that's going to impact that implementation? And you're getting so many good combinations of things that are going to come from your AEM guides environment that you can just go in and say, this is where we are, this is where we're going. And again, it's this journey part. You're at the point where you've got your plan, you've got your roadmap, you know where your stops are along the way, you've already booked your hotels, you know that when you're in town, you're going to go to this concert and you're going to eat at that restaurant. So it's really nice to look at it and see, you know, this clear vision out the front window.
Yeah, we're at such an exciting place right now because now we're seeing it all start to come together and our training's right down the road. My team is so excited and I can't tell you how many times they've said, I can't wait till we don't have to use Windows 7 anymore. It's freezing up. They're just going to be so happy when we can streamline everything. So we're all eagerly awaiting the training.
Excellent. As we start to get back to this idea of destination DITA, that was your destination years ago. Right. There have been changes along the way. The road is winding, and at times you don't necessarily double back onto the same road, but it might be that you loop around and you look down and you go, hey, we were just over there 2 months ago, and we can see where we were, and we can also have this vision looking forward. There is success to be had. And a lot of those high-level companies, when they go out and they succeed, they do so because they have that state-of-the-art type of an environment. They're not on the bleeding edge. They're not necessarily trying to do something that is just on the other side of 10 minutes or a month or a year from now, but they're also not back 10 years ago. And you are at this point of success. You've got your authoring and your publishing tool. You've got updates to that. You're changing over your operating system and environment. You're cleaning up the number of external tools, plugins, supporting pieces that exist. So that's sort of my next question. This destination that you're sort of arriving at now, what are some of the big things in regards to this first set of bullets that really stands out in your mind?
So we're moving from an authoring desktop authoring and publishing tool to the cloud, which will use Windows 10, so we can get rid of our virtual Windows 7 session. We'll be able to use AEM as the repository. Our current situation was we had to store things in our CMS, so that was another step that we had to take to get our source files stored. And then we're going to reduce the number of software that we actually have to use for authoring and publishing in half. And that's going to be nice because it just saves us a few, pickups and drop-offs. My team's very excited about that as well.
And you're going to be losing that Excel spreadsheet, which I'm sure is a real heartbreak for you. Access, is that part of that 6-to-3 reduction? The Access side, the Excel side?
Yep.
There's some definite efficiencies that are going to be coming into play, because you're going to have everything in one place. You're not necessarily going to have to leave and find the most current version. Are you still at that? How many writers was it? 22 writers 12 years ago?
I have a team of 5 and then myself. So it's changed.
So the expectation is do more with less?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And again, this is something that we've been looking at with a lot of clients, is the idea of the Great Resignation. We have a lot of people who have a lot of experience in an organization, and there's not a ton of people who are backfilling those roles. And it's nothing to do with the companies. It is, in North America at least, it is purely demographics. If we look at, literally, there was the baby boom. There were families having 5 kids, 8 kids, 10 kids in some cases. And then it's down to 3 kids, 4 kids, and down to 1 or 2.
Right.
And it's nice to see that you as an organization are starting to look at what can we do in order to do more with less. And part of that is updating that technology. And another part of it is updating the best practices. I know we've worked to remove the specializations. Not that specializations are good or evil. It's just that they're not needed in your environment. We're starting to play with the idea of additional DITA functions, the reuse, the automation that's available, the idea of finding things and working with metadata, tracking metrics, of course. So I thought maybe you can explore those in a little more detail for a few minutes.
Sure. So, like I said, we didn't have a lot of specialization, but we really just wanted to go as vanilla as possible. Just to keep things simple and streamlined. We definitely want to increase our reuse, and using AEM, we're going to be able to easily determine the content and topics that are out there. They're going to be in a reuse folder so that we know where to even look for them, and the system will tell you where things are used. And that is so different from what we have now. One of the things that we're super excited about is the automated review and approval process. So right now, we publish everything in PDFs, and we have to attach the PDF to an email and send it out to any kind of subject matter expert for review and approval. So we exchange those back and forth, and it works, but we want to be able to do that, and we are going to do that using AEM's automated process. So we're going to be working with Bernard to get that set up. We also want to move from not just publishing to PDFs, but publishing HTML. So that's going to be much easier for us to do in this tool. That's hopefully not too far down the road. We are going to improve our metadata and findability. This analysis that we did for the metadata getting ready for ingestion has helped us really look at what we have and what we don't have. And that's going to help us determine what we need to do and what we will do going forward. And then I'm probably most excited about the improved automated tracking and reporting, because my team members don't have to do that, but I do. And I just can't wait until I can get some reports set up where I can push a button and it gives me the information that I need. And metrics is huge. I mean, how do you sell a product, or how do you know what to focus your time on if you can't determine who your audience is, or how often it's used, or how important it is? So those are big hitters for us, all those things.
There's a couple of good things that came to mind. The reuse idea, just taking your content and doing the analysis and then doing the rewrite so that it becomes far more precise. Then you can go through and say, this is exactly what we have, standardizing your phrasing, making it easier, taking advantage of that task concept reference. The findability, I've said this in so many sessions, searching sucks, all right? Apologies to Google and others. Nobody ever wants to do a search. You want to find. I don't want to go searching for information on how I put in a claim after my car is stolen. I want to find the information. More importantly, I don't even want to find the information. I want my insurance company to step up and say, sorry to hear the bad news. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you a rental immediately until such time as you're able to go out and get yourself a new vehicle. Type behind the scenes. Here's all the information that I as an agent need to be passing on to somebody. And it's just there. I love the idea of somebody saying, oh, we've documented this entire workflow and all of this. And someone turns around and goes, oh yeah, I don't use that. And then you get all sad and you say, what do you mean you don't use it? We spent a lot of time building it. No, you know what? The answers are already here on screen in front of me. You sit there and you go, that's the system. That's the thing we built. And it's wonderful because they don't even realize how much easier their life has become when it comes to what they need to do day to day at work. And metrics, I love the idea of also finding the bottom 10. Everybody's about the top 10. What are the things what about the bottom 10? Because you're spending time and effort to build it. Maybe the keywords aren't the right ones. Maybe it's not being found because it's no longer necessary to teach people or explain some of those basic pieces. I think where you are and what you're doing is fantastic. And overall, you're at a starting point again. This time, I think there's a key difference from where you were 10 plus years ago, though. And I would put that towards the idea of DITA is far more mature. The tools that are on the market are far more all-encompassing in what they're capable of doing. You don't need to have a separate tool to do so many of the different things that you're looking at in this consolidated slide view of where you are. So moving forward, I don't think you're going to have to go back 10 years later and say, well, we've got to revisit. But what's next? What are some of the things that you're thinking are going to be 6 months, a year, and 5 years, or 10 down the road? You mentioned the idea of having online, of having these metrics. What's your vision beyond that?
Yeah, I'd really like to see AEM sites be our repository for, or I should say our end user interface. We'll see if I can make that happen down the road. We need a better end user repository that's more friendly. I definitely want to move toward HTML publishing. I'd like to be able to provide more web type content than PDFs. You've got people that like the PDFs because that's what they've used for so many years, but you have a lot of people out there that really don't want to look through a PDF or a book type format, and search in general would be so much nicer just in the HTML format. So I can see us moving more toward that, hopefully not too far down the road.
And if we get it right, you'll be able to take advantage of things like a chat agent and actually have one that's friendly and a little more intuitive, because behind the scenes, your content's in better shape. There's several ways that I know from my own experiences. We had a huge windstorm that knocked down a tree, and I had to get in touch with insurance, and there was damage. And the conversation was so quick and painless when we finally got to sort of, the right people who were able to have the right conversations about the types of things. But that phone system of press 1 for this and 2 for that, those are things that I'm so looking forward to going away, so that we can have that natural conversation like we are right now in order to find exactly what's needed. You and your team have been awesome to work with. I've been really, really happy. So thank you, Valerie, for the support that you've given us along the way, the trust that you've put into us so that we can help, so that you can trust in your content. And to Karen and to others who have been involved up along the chain in the organization. For this session as well, a quick shout out, thank you, Stefan, the rest of the team over at Adobe, those of you who have attended. And Valerie, I'll turn it over to you for sort of the last word on thank yous and so on. And we'll keep an eye on the chat and answer questions if there's others that come up. But Valerie, I'll turn it over to you and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So I'd like to extend a thank you to you and Nathan and others and Publishing Smarter for everything that you've done and continue to do for us. We would not be where we're at without you and your expertise. So we appreciate all of you more than you know. And again, I'd like to thank Karen Skorupski for the support that she has given us and continues to give us, my manager at Erie, and the executive vice president that supported her as well, and everyone at Erie that's helping us meet our destination. So thank you very much.
Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.